China represents a visibly successful alternative found guilty of corruption, and they're usually stripped of their wealth. I've lived in the Western culture in the UK. The power and the authority lie with the citizens. A staggering amount of money will be spent on the 2024 presidential election.
The United States should adopt a Cold War-style containment policy toward China.
It's beginning to feel for many that it is broken, and the rich come out of their bunkers in New Zealand or wherever. But my question then becomes, how? So I think America is holding back China because China represents a visibly successful alternative to what America has. And please note, I am saying has. I am not referring to what America had. A lot of things have changed in America since the founding fathers wrote that operating manual for the good old US of A, the operating manual that we know as the Constitution. And I'll come back to that because I want to pick up on one key thread with this video essay. So China has a system that is something along the lines of socialism mixed with capitalism, and it's a one-party political party heading that up. As we know, the Communist Party of China, as described in the country's manifesto, the CPC is the leadership core for the cause of socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's what it says in the manifesto. There's a whole system in place in China to support how people can proactively influence the country's politics at the local level, and also in turn further up the ladder to more provincial and national levels. Local political leaders are subject to a merit-based performance system. If they do not make the positive changes requested locally, the local communities then can remove them, which is the same further up the ladder, the political chain that you actually get. If you want to know more about that, go to Jerry's Take on China. His YouTube channel will explain a lot in detail. If you want to take the time to understand the voting system in China, please go there. That's amazing information. China isn't perfect. The system, like everything, is open to abuse by people with selfish and narcissistic tendencies. Sound familiar? We know this because sometimes in the media here, we read a lot about politicians being found guilty of corruption, and they're usually stripped of their wealth and jailed for life, in some cases even worse. Over the last 10 years, there has been a large mobilisation of the resources to investigate and stop the abuse and the corruption. And this has coincided with some of China's fastest growing years of development and advances. The central tenet of the CPC is to serve the fundamental interests of the greatest possibility majority of the Chinese people, and to serve the people wholeheartedly. I read this also in detail when I was reading through some of the text of the Communist Party of China's manifesto. That phrase put me in mind of the famous quote from Abraham Lincoln in his famous Gettysburg Address. He said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall never perish from the earth." This quote captures the essence of democracy and its fundamental principle on which Western nations are built, with the idea being the power and the authority lie with citizens. So having mentioned America, Lincoln and the Constitution, it is clear when you look at China, the political process in China and America is different. Not always that much different, but it's different, and we have to just accept that. It just has to be. It's different, that's it. Just because America and the Western allies claim that democracy is the only way, that does not make democracy right for everyone. It makes it right for them in their culture. Now, To be honest, I am nowhere on this when it comes to what's right or wrong. I don't even think it should be like that. I'm not that type of binary choice kind of guy. Don't have that mind. But I do hold the position that both systems can exist in the same world. I've lived in the Western culture in the UK, and the political system there for most of my life has been a little bit touch and go. In the last few years living in China, I have begun to question whether there are other ways to govern countries. After all, China has achieved a lot in 50 years without any major conflicts. And that is something that you just got to understand and also admire.
One thing about China that I would like to emphasize, China went from 80% extreme poverty in 1980 to no extreme poverty 40 years later. It is the most successful economic development in history. It learned a lot from Korea, by the way. It learned a lot from Japan. It learned a lot from the neighbors. It's extraordinarily successful. Life expectancy rose enormously. Education rose enormously. Quality of life rose enormously. Hunger fell completely. This is an accomplishment. We should take joy in China's accomplishment, not fear from it.
Now, going back to the Constitution of America, the checks and balances in that system, such as the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so on, all of which are captured in Lincoln's quote. The one big thing that stands out for me from his quote is what I pick up on, and that is the power and the authority lie with the citizens. We often hear that China is an authoritarian system and that people have no say, and that's not true. And then when we reference that, we always get directed to America and the political system that is apparently in place there, that unwavering democracy. But, and this is where I'm going to follow this thread, I have been looking into the increasing impact that money plays in the American political system, the very system that is supposed to allow the power and the authority to lie with the citizens. And it's becoming more apparent to me that the American system is becoming less and less of that supposedly role model, that democracy role model. In January 2010, the Supreme Court decided a famous case in the United States. The case was called Citizen United versus Federal Election Commission. That decision ruled that is your First Amendment right to spend any amount of money that you want in support of your political party. And at that moment, it opened the floodgates to allow unlimited spending on political campaigns, with the only caveat to that is that you cannot directly donate to the campaign. So in the last 14 years since that's been passed, there has been an astronomical rise in what we call PACs, Political Action Committees. They act as a middleman for the campaign funding, and since then money has been pouring into this system, pouring into the PACs, pouring into the America. And as we know in America, money often wins the election. And this has meant that money has become super important to the whole election process. And that means that the elected officials in America, all 536 of them in Congress, spend more than half of their time fundraising and not political activities like policy making for the people that actually vote for them, apparently. So they spend their time fundraising and not making policy decisions in the House or the Senate. A staggering amount of money will be spent on the 2024 presidential election. In 2020, Biden's campaign spent $1.6 billion, and that was without calculating the additional money that was spent by the PACs. That money from the PACs is often invisible in the way it's accounted for. As you look at it, you can never find exactly the true amount. According to the political advertising tracking firm Ad Impact, it is estimated that $10.2 billion will be spent on advertising, including broadcasting TV, cable TV, radio, social media and so on, this presidential election. And that for me is mind-blowing. And you can imagine who is spending this money and what they are getting back for that investment. We can run through them: food companies, medical, military, energy companies, you name it, even other sovereign countries. So the whole thing is extreme for me. And each and every one of these big investors donating into the political system, they will want something back in return. And often that something will not be in the best interest of the vast majority of the people. So you have got to ask yourself, does the political system in America wholeheartedly have the interest of the majority of its people at its core principle? In fact, that is a good question to ask yourself when you look at many other democracies. A couple of other things here. If you think that making your difference or making your $100 donation is making a difference, then I would say think again. I would suggest that you're throwing your money away. Your voice, compared to the big guys, will never be heard over them. I would also say, given that it takes a lot of time to raise funds, then if you can get a political class that is already wealthy, a la Donald Trump, then that would be so much easier for time management and effort. So, being a politician is now becoming increasingly more the pursuit of the wealthy, because the ordinary person cannot even afford it. So this a romantic idea that anyone can be the president of the United States is beginning to look rather stupid. Even more so, the idea that Abraham Lincoln so boldly captured in his beautiful words, the power and the authority lie with the citizens, is also becoming more and more under threat.
The world is a tense place these days, with Europe consumed by its biggest land war since 1945 and conflict continuing to convulse the Middle East. These tensions would pale into insignificance, however, if a third arena were to erupt in Asia, involving the United States and China. Those tensions have in fact calmed down in recent months, as both Washington and Beijing have sought to stabilize their relationship. But there are now cries in Washington to change all that. In an essay in Foreign Affairs, Matt Pottinger and Mike Gallagher argue that the United States should adopt a Cold War-style containment policy toward China, whose goal should be victory, that could encourage the Chinese people to, quote, explore new models of development and governance, unquote. Pottinger acknowledged on the show last week that an effective U.S. strategy might naturally lead to some form of regime collapse. Pottinger was Donald Trump's senior-most aide on China policy, and Gallagher, an outgoing congressman, shared.
So this brings me full circle back to my original opening statement. I think America is holding back China in a way because China represents a visibly successful alternative to what America currently has. I'm not saying that we all adopt the political system that China has, because that system is right for them, it's right for the culture, maybe not correct for the West. What I am suggesting is that how we are working in the West, the democratic system in the West, that democracy that we're so proud of, how that is working is a little bit more strained. It's beginning to feel for many that it is broken. And with the advances so far in technology, the pace of change and everything from demographics to the speed of communication, I think personally it's time for reform. Sadly though, I feel that the reform which we so desperately need, and I think many agree with me on this, will only come about when we see more global conflict, driven by the foreign policy of a nation that cannot bear to lose its place in the world or share its place in the world, and in return for the money that is being invested in pushing their agenda. And this time, if we are not careful, the conflict will be on an industrial scale of which we have never seen before in the world. And only when we're all exhausted, and many of us have lost family and friends, and the rich come out of their bunkers in New Zealand or wherever, only then I feel we will have the energy to find another way. Unless, of course, we find a way now and we change that course. But my question then becomes, how? This is Ian here in Reitan Park in Beijing. Very reflective, my video essay. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your community, and above all, let's fight for that peace. Take care. Peace out.
Before we all get self-righteous about what Israel's doing, and I feel horrible for the innocent people in Gaza that are dying, but we shouldn't forget that we, the United States, killed a lot of innocent people in Mosul and Raqqa, that we, the United States, killed 12,000 innocent French civilians. And here we are on the 80th anniversary of Normandy, on the prep fires for Normandy. We destroyed 69 Japanese cities, not including Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We slaughtered people in massive numbers, innocent people who had nothing to do with their government, men, women, and children. War is a terrible thing, but if it's going to have meaning, if it's going to have any sense of morality, it has to be a political purpose, and it must be achieved rapidly with the least cost, and that you do by speed.
And one of the things I
serving in the Army, in the Marines, in the Air Force, in the Navy, you have the absolute right to refuse to take part in these criminal wars, and that's a right that all of you should exercise. We've been to Iraq, we've been to Afghanistan, and we know what these wars are really about. We joined the military, and they tell us that our enemies are poor people in caves in Afghanistan, or poor people in the deserts of Iraq. But we've been to those countries, and we know that our enemies are not other poor people abroad. Our enemies are the people that laid us off from our jobs, that denied us health care, that make it impossible to get an education. Our enemies are not in the poorest countries on the planet, but right here in the richest one. They're not going to end the wars, because it's not our government. It's their government. It's the government of the rich. It's the government of Wall Street, of the oil giants, of the defense contractors. It's their government, and the only language that they understand is shutting down business as usual. And that's what we're doing here today, and we're going to continue to do until these wars are over.